Greetings, everyone. A kiss on both cheeks, and here's a 20 for that thing you took care of that time. Today on the show, it's a familial fracas featuring foreboding fathers whose families hail from the old world and are now staking their claim on America. And in the world of film and television, because we have an all-time mob mayhem matchup, it's the Godfather trilogy going up against the Sopranos series in this episode of Versus. In one corner, you have the Corleone family and their gaggle of loyal denizens and hangers-on. In the other corner, it's the Soprano clan and their flock of Goodfellas, ne'er-do-wells, and mental health experts. So you may already be thinking, but Mark, you handsome bastard, how can we accurately compare a classic movie trilogy to a beloved TV series? Don't worry, if it seems like we're comparing apples to oranges, remember that oranges are Vito's favorite fruit. Until you know that thing that happened. Here's how we'll determine a winner. Round 1, box office/ratings. Round 2, Tomatometer/audience score. Round 3, best characters. Round 4, iconic moments. And then we'll do a wild card round that could involve which family I'd rather spend a holiday with or whose daughter's wedding I'd rather attend. The Godfather is making its debut on Versus, although those first two films were probably the MVP when the 1970s won the Best Picture Decade episode. Meanwhile, The Sopranos is looking to rebound after losing a nail-biter to Breaking Bad last season. And when a guy like Tony Soprano is seeking revenge, it's best to, I might not have much time left. So, let's get it on. Round 1, box office/ratings. And here we have the ultimate conundrum when comparing Pop-Tarts to Apple Jacks. Two totally different metrics are utilized to calculate who was watching what at the movies or at home. And while The Sopranos will be hoping that the ratings during its run are looking sharp, The Godfather is hoping to attract some eye-popping ticket receipts. It's obviously not going to be an exact science, but that's why I'm here. I took AP Chemistry in high school. How'd I do? Sorry, that's family business only. So let's just see if immediately anything is going to stand out. And I see a rather large number. I also took AP Calculus, and that would be the $1 billion generated by the three Godfather films. The 1970s may have not featured as much competition week to week as we see now, but also keep in mind that the price of a ticket back then was, 35 cents? $1? I think you could also just sing a jaunty tune at the box office window and they'd let you in. The lion's share of Godfather coin is thanks to the OG, Part 1, which did $722 million during its lengthy run. Curiously, The Godfather 2's take was a far cry from its predecessor, hauling in a still healthy $232 million. So we added a De Niro, and we still shed $500 million of weight? Okay, well, how'd we do when Andy Garcia and Sofia Coppola joined the party a couple decades later? Even less dollars. But for all the stigma surrounding that third installment, it still grossed $145 million, which brings the entire trilogy's total to $1.099 billion. That's so much cheddar, we don't even meddle in the drug trafficking trade. Right, Michael? The Sopranos has a sizable task ahead of it. How do you beat that kind of dough with ratings? Well, remember this. By the time the Tony Murder Variety Show debuted on HBO in January of 1999, viewers already had plenty of options on what to watch. So how did The Sopranos do amidst a sea of entertainment on the small screen? Okay, well, to start, its lowest season is its first one, which clocked about 3.5 million viewers per episode. But that word of mouth is a tricky thing, and as the show racked up accolades, so too did its rating numbers. 7.6 million folks tuned into the Season 2 opener, and throughout that entire year, The Sopranos held strong, notching an average of 6.62 gawkers in millions per episode. And if you think that's impressive, just wait another season. Season 3 debuted to the all-time highest number for any one Sopranos episode ever at a ridiculous 22 million viewers, which is roughly 44 million eyeballs, hoping for yet another gloriously devious season. Season 4 is the record holder for most average viewers, as almost 11 million people were on board each and every week. And the final two seasons would hover around 8.5 million viewers on average, and that hotly debated series finale caught the interest of nearly 12 million folks, one of whom was me, who had never seen the show at the time and immediately rooted for Tony thanks to our shared love of Journey. If you think that the box office take and the ratings total should go their separate ways, you get it, it's a Journey song, then maybe you're right. But these two franchises are linked in another, more curious way. After that series finale abruptly cut to black, every cable company in America was flooded with angry phone calls from fans who thought their cable cut out at the worst possible time, the ending of The Sopranos. Well, it turns out that was the ending of The Sopranos, but I still imagine some cords were permanently cut that evening. Meanwhile, The Godfather also has an impressive television feat on its resume. In 1974, the film made its small screen debut on NBC. Hey, that's us. We're all in this together. And get this, as soon as the broadcast ended, New York City saw a huge spike in toilet flushes that resulted in several flooding issues. Everyone was glued to their TV during The Godfather, and they held it in until the closing credits. I gotta assume some of those folks also just wanted to see, if any weaponry was hidden in their private throne rooms, like in the movie. It's kind of a big plot point in that flick. And now I have to award this round to someone, but I'm not gonna make it easy on myself by saying, well, The Sopranos was easier to watch because you didn't have to leave the house. It's not that people had to make more of an effort to go out and see the Godfather movies. It's the sheer amount of humanity that made the theater trip again and again and again, and then watched it at home while their bladder slowly expanded. Aren't you glad you can just now pause TV when nature calls? $1 billion spawned from the 70s to the early 90s is no joke, and it makes all the difference here. The Godfather plunges its way to a win and has an early lead, 1-0.
I'm a little depressed.
Round 2, Tomatometer / audience score. Aha! Finally a round where the things might get a tad bit more balanced, as the beloved Tomatometer and its pal the audience score are reliable metrics for movies, TV, and some short flicks like 2020's The Godfather Coda, which weighs in on the Tomatometer at 87%. Speaking of which, that happens to be the average for all 3 films in the Corleone franchise. And if 87% sounds a little bit low, there's a reason, and you already know what it is. It's an elephant in the room, and said creature is named The Godfather 3. I don't know how you compete with the first 2 flicks, but 3 is still fresh at 68%, which isn't bad until you look at its big brothers. The Godfather is currently at 98% certified fresh, and The Godfather 2 falls all the way down 1 whole percentage point at 97% certified fresh. Which begs the question, who's in the 2% of critics that weren't smitten with Vito, Michael, Sonny, and the gang? That doesn't sound like a fun clique to hang out in. Whoever they were, they might favor The Sopranos because that show can boast 2 seasons that are at a perfect 100% on the Tomatometer. It's seasons 1 and 3 for keeping score at home, and the show was comfortably coasting in the 90 percentile and above until it didn't quite stick the landing. The first part of season 6 is at 89%, and the second part of its finale season is the low bar setter at 83%. Did I mention that not everyone was stone in love with that ending? That's another Journey song, and it might have a few up more sleeve. I don't know, it'll be fun. Keep watching. Overall, The Sopranos' Tomatometer average is a stellar 92%, which gives it the lead over The Godfather. But now, take a gander at the audience score, and it's going to be another nail-biter. Here's the bad news for Tony and Carmela Soprano. They have no seasons that are at that lofty perch of 100%. But now the good news, none of their seasons dip below 97%. None! Including the season that made a bunch of dads yell at DirecTV when they were just starting that little satellite business. The Sopranos is resting well with a 98% overall average on the audience score, and The Godfather has some work to do. And it's up to the task. Part 1 is at 98%, and Part 2 is at 97%, according to our trusty audience score. And now it all comes down to Part 3, which is not really a position The Godfather wanted to be in. It's an even steeper fall than it was on the Tomatometer, as The Godfather 3 clocks in at a barely fresh 61%. Audiences. They love the original, they love the sequel, and then they kind of fell off the horse riding into the sunset. Look, the ending of both these properties are controversial to say the least, and it's going to continue to be a factor in this matchup. But for this round, it does appear that both critics and audiences were much more forgiving about one scene ending a wee bit early, as opposed to an entire film simply not living up to its namesake. My Monday morning quarterback advice for The Godfather 3? Put in Ewoks. A ton of them. It worked for Return of the Jedi and Return of the King. What's that? There's no Ewoks in Lord of the Rings, really? Okay, well, a note to those films. Ewoks make everything better. And they probably have a criminal underbelly. We're getting off track. Now I want to see that movie. The Sopranos wins round 2, and we got us a tied ball game, 1-1.
He's a traitor. Don't forget that.
Sometimes life is good.
Round 3, best characters. So we're tied after 2 intense rounds thus far, and when you think about how The Sopranos could possibly surge ahead of the celebrated film franchise that kicked off almost 20 years before Tony was even a twinkle in HBO's eye, it might be here, best characters. Why? Well, The Sopranos had 6 seasons to establish existing players, introduce new ones, and of course, whack some of the folks that needed to be taken care of. And you have to start with James Gandolfini's masterful portrayal of Tony, a man who Entertainment Weekly summed up rather nicely with, the king of anti-heroes. Tony was a rumbling storm cloud of a man who could shift from oafish charm to frightening rage to heartbreaking self-pity at the drop of a cannoli. I get that reference. But it's true, and maybe even giving him the title of anti-hero isn't villainous enough for all of the crimes he committed on a pretty much daily, or hourly basis. But we still thought that there was good in him, that there was something worth redeeming in that looming stormfront of a man. Much of that good was on display when it came to Tony doing what he could for his family. Even though his actions caused much of the expiration worn by Tony's wife, Carmela, played by the equally great Edie Falco, Gandolfini and Falco each took home 3 Emmys during the run of The Sopranos, and that's in no small way thanks to how the two interacted with one another on screen. Carm knew, or at least she suspected, much of the no-good that her husband was up to, but she was mostly able to keep her emotions at bay for the good of the Soprano family. And like the audience, she knew, or at least hoped, that the good outweighed the bad with her husband and prayed that his angels would outlast his demons. And while I wouldn't classify his kids as angels, both Meadow and AJ proved to be valuable assets to the show that didn't shy away from tough issues that teens deal with, especially if their old man is in waste management. The patriarch of the Godfather films was such a powerful presence and had such an impact on his family that he had to be portrayed by not one, but 2 Oscar-winning actors. Marlon Brando and Robert De Niro won Oscars for the shared role of Vito Corleone, Brando obviously for The Godfather, and De Niro for the flashbacks of young Vito in The Godfather 2. The film franchise leaves no doubt who its title is referencing from the opening sequence where we see Vito at the peak of his influence. Brando plays him note perfect, but later in the film would also deftly handle a suddenly frail Corleone hoping to pull through after a murder attempt in broad daylight. And to witness De Niro nail the formative years of the character in the next film is equally as impressive. It's a shame that we would have to wait another 20 years to see him and Pacino share another movie and actually have a few scenes together in 1995's Heat. Oh, hey, look at that. Al Pacino's pretty good in these flicks too. As Michael, his arc in the first film goes from a guy who keeps his distance from the family at first, but sees an opportunity to assert his rightful place as the successor and leans into it, even though his brother, the hot-headed Sonny, would appear to be the logical choice at the film's outset. Taken in when he was just a boy and raised like a Corleone, Robert Duvall's Tom Hagen proved to be an invaluable asset to Vito, whose loyalty to the familial causes was always unquestioned. In case you still weren't convinced on how epic The Godfather is, consider that James Caan, Al Pacino, and Robert Duvall all earned Best Supporting Actor nominations for the film. Who won? You guessed it, Joel Grey for his role as the MC from Cabaret. Pacino would go on to be nominated for Best Lead Actor for The Godfather 2, where he lost? It must have been to Jack Nicholson in Chinatown, right? No? Okay, Dustin Hoffman as Lenny Bruce. Huh? What's that? They all lost to Art Carney for Henry and Tonto. Fair enough. For what it's worth, De Niro did win that night for Vito, which makes the rule. If you play Vito, you win gold. If you play anyone else in the family, you get a nomination. Just like when Andy Garcia was nominated for his role as Vincent in The Godfather 3. But the families themselves are just the start of the memorable characters we've had in these 2 pillars of entertainment. Who could forget Luca Brasi and Clemenza? Luca still suffering one of the tougher demises in mob movie history. And The Godfather 2, we'd also see Talia Shire, Lee Strasberg, and Michael V. Gazzo earn Best Supporting nominations. John Cazale as Fredo, Diane Keaton as Kay, and Abe Vigoda as Tazio are also incredible portrayals that deepen the lore of the first 2 Godfather films. Folks weren't as kind towards Sofia Coppola in The Godfather 3, but again, the movie is still fresh. It's just not super amazing, best of all time kind of fresh. And if it's fresh you want, then feast your eyes on the fashion of Tony and his mafia cronies in The Sopranos. We get Silvio, played by Steven Van Zandt. Hey, did you know Bruce Springsteen's guitarist is also named Steven Van... It's the same person. That's little Stevie. Talk about versatility. How many of us could pull off the fun, positive vibes of Glory Days and then go whack Adriana like that? Michael Imperioli as Christopher Moltisanti and Tony Sirico as Paulie Walnuts also lend unforgettable performances to the series. In fact, Sirico had some, personal experiences to rely on for his role. He was a real wise guy, getting arrested 28 times and serving 20 months in jail. And his wardrobe is just perfect. Vincent Pastore as Big Pussy and Drea De Matteo as Adriana made us feel so many things when their respective characters met their fate. And The Sopranos also featured dozens of great supporting roles from folks like Steve Buscemi, Robert Patrick, and Joe Pantoliano. Joey Pants! But while both franchises have stars and award-winning performances for days, The Sopranos was able to take full advantage of its length over the course of 6, 2.5 seasons to flesh out its most valuable contributors. As impressive as The Godfather is for engaging us so deep into this world so fast, the slow burn of The Sopranos and its gradual matriculation of character arcs is just too powerful to ignore. And one of the key reasons for our continued sympathy of Tony is the character that he keeps returning to week after week, Dr. Melfi, played by Lorraine Bracco. Her matching of wits with Tony as she's coaching him through his issues reveal his inner complexities and demons that he has, and he shares some of those with his therapist. Their sessions are one of the biggest reasons that The Sopranos is a show that can be binged, and I've done it many times, but each hour is so heavy you could also stand to take 6-7 days off between each episode. You know, that's how we used to have to do it, kids. You just gotta wait. Led by James Gandolfini and Edie Falco's perfectly layered portrayals, it is The Sopranos who sees the lead in round 3, and now The Godfather finds itself trailing 2-1.
What's the matter with you? I think your brain is going soft.
But before we move on to round 4, it's trivia time. Who is the only actor to appear in both The Godfather and The Sopranos franchises? Thanks to Andre from Brad Garrett's Comedy Club in Las Vegas for this gem of trivia know-how. It's Dominique Giannese. He's Uncle Junior on The Sopranos, but he was also Johnny Owa in The Godfather 2. It's a fun fact. Use it on your friends. All right, here comes the next round. Round 4, iconic moments. Folks, if you've seen any of the Godfather movies, you're probably aware that Vito doesn't like being in debt to anyone else, and he hates losing. But that's the position his team currently finds itself in, as The Sopranos' cacophony of characters were too much for the 3 Coppola films. But now we turn our eyes and ears to the moments that made these franchises special. If you're known to be arguably the best movie or TV show ever, then yeah, we got moments. Some of these instances from The Sopranos actually happened in the show, but just as striking are the weird dreams and visions that Tony has all too often. Whether it's a panic attack feeding his beloved ducks in season 1, or an all-out David Lynchian fever dream in season 4, these illuminate the fragility of a guy who appears to be unsinkable on the surface. That buoyancy usually arrives in the form of classic boss toughness. One of my personal faves is when Tony murders Fabian while on a college campus visit trip with his daughter. Kids, they grow up so fast. Speaking of kills, some of these whacks hurt more than others. Yes, we know Big Pussy had it coming, but it was nevertheless emotional when the fellas took him out on the boat for one last time, and it appears to be a mission that still haunts seasons later. Similarly, the brutality of this life is on full display when Adriana gets killed by Silvio in season 5. I'd also highlight her admitting to being an FBI informant from that very same season. Emotional deaths were the centerpiece of the Godfather trilogy, whether it's Michael leaving us all by himself in The Godfather 3, or it's Sonny dying in the first film, or Vito being gunned down at a fruit stand. The guy just wanted some oranges. But he, of course, was also a known mob boss, and there's no better evidence of that than young Vito in The Godfather 2 when he murders the 2 Dons. The most emotional moment of that entire movie, however, is a toss-up between the "you won't take my children" speech and the "I know it was you, Fredo" line. Both still hold up as all-time acting masterclass scenes. But hey, even though there's tons of killings and families being ripped apart, we can still have some fun, right? One of my favorite things about both The Godfather and The Sopranos are the moments of celebration and community, even though we as an audience know that we're eventually being set up and we're going to see the cost of these gatherings. Vito's daughter getting married is a perfect opening that gives us the power dynamics within and around the Corleones. Not too long after, we get to hear the perfect line, "I'm going to make him an offer he can't refuse." What's the offer? Well, it's not great if you're a jockey, I'll tell you that. Any day you wake up and there isn't a horse head in your bed, that's a good morning. And one of the best afternoons in The Sopranos is the curious at the time and now classic season 3 episode Pine Barrens, in which Chris and Polly get lost in the woods. We get lots of laughs here along with some violence, and that episode was actually directed by Steve Buscemi, who, if you'll recall, was his own little mob boss in the film Billy Madison. If it's controversy you want, then let's cut to the chase. The ending of The Sopranos remains one of the most talked about finales in TV history, and the debate still rages on. But for the abruptness of what it was trying to accomplish, it's a perfect setup. We enter a diner, there's not much in the way of dialogue, and that enhances the eerie feel that it's about to go down. After all the vicious murders we'd seen in gory fashion on the show, the one we were anticipating dreading the most isn't shown, or did it ever really happen? Talk amongst yourselves. For the Godfather series, for me, the scenes that still resonate the most are watching Michael come into his own. Seeing the loss of his own lover in The Godfather seals the lifestyle that, in the back of his mind, he always knew was inevitable. And when Sollozzo and McCluskey get shot in the restaurant, his fate is sealed as the new Corleone not to mess with. We also get the classic leave the gun, take the cannoli line that to this day might be one of the most quoted lines in Best Picture winner history. It's moments aplenty from both properties in this round that really make it a tough call. But while The Sopranos is a well-paced serial that will slowly build up to its legendary payoffs, the first two Godfather films, they play out like it's one long great moment. Nothing is wasted in storytelling, and everything has a purpose. And even in rewatching The Godfather 3, it still has some punch, like when Joey Zaza gets killed. Going back to see Tony's speech to his family from season 1 that sets up so many of the events we're about to see made this decision excruciating, but the added quotability of The Godfather from virtually every major performer in those movies won out at the end of the day here. The Godfather takes round 4, and we got us a tied ball game heading into the last round, 2-2.
Don't ever take sides with anyone against the family again.
And now it's time for the wild card round, Legacy. If it looks like I'm sweating a little bit on camera, it's because I'm just imagining in my head these two families watching me make a decision as to who I like better. I like y'all equally. It's just the entertainment options. It's a tough call, folks, and you really can't tell the story of TV without mentioning The Sopranos, and the history of film would be missing a giant piece without The Godfather. The legacy of these two legendary entities aren't even limited to their initial mediums. They've transcended over the years to become a part of the zeitgeist, lexicon, and other big words that I have no business using. Let's start with the stats. These works dominated their respective fields in the most prestigious award categories. The Sopranos has 113 wins and over 300 nominations in premium TV award circles, and The Godfather was always a presence at the Oscars, winning Best Picture for both parts 1 and 2 and securing 7 nominations for part 3. But it's The Sopranos that get a leg up when it comes to award winning, as it was the very first cable TV show to win an Emmy for Most Outstanding Drama in 2004. That was a watershed moment for television, and in no small part paved the way for cable shows and eventually streaming shows to be taken just as seriously, and in many ways surpass that of network TV. The endings do factor into legacy here, and it really is whether you prefer the unknown quantity that is Tony's demise or the now alone Michael slumping and dying in his chair. The Sopranos was certainly the one that was more talked about, particularly on MySpace, but that's also because it was more controversial, and it still is almost 15 years later. If The Sopranos did have an early lead in this round, then The Godfather is about to come roaring back. It would be breaking news if The Godfather landed as low as number 3 on any of the list of the greatest all-time films. It currently occupies the number 2 slot on both the AFI and BFI lists, and it was voted as the best film in history on the charts of Entertainment Weekly, Empire Magazine, and The Hollywood Reporter. And a lot of people still think The Godfather 2 is even better. Meanwhile, The Sopranos makes regular appearances in the top 5 of almost every best TV show list. In fact, it does top the heap at number 1 on Rolling Stone's list and placed at number 3 according to Empire and number 6 for The Hollywood Reporter. That's, of course, the magazine Rolling Stone and not the band The Rolling Stones, although I imagine they probably appreciate the show too. So after all of the awards and rankings start to fade, what are we left with? What is that intrinsic element that makes each franchise so unique and memorable? Well, for The Sopranos, it's the pioneering efforts in storytelling. This show was never interested in how TV could limit it. It only sought to expand what was possible with telling a story that involved so much emotional depth. Every show that followed it, from Breaking Bad to Lost to Tiger King, probably owes a monster debt of gratitude to what David Chase brought to HBO on a weekly basis for 6.5 glorious seasons. It wasn't always consistent in terms of pacing or tone, but maybe that was the point. And bonus props should be awarded to its embracing of mental health awareness. America saw a tough guy like Tony Soprano move mountains just to make his weekly therapy appointments, and one has to imagine that let millions of people know it's all right to ask for help. In the other corner, The Godfather is a tremendous story from Mario Puzo, but what the films did was set the standard for greatness in terms of movie making. Every quality a film should have is what the first 2 Godfather films did, arguably better than any cinematic venture before or after. Writing, directing, and acting are all on a par with anything else that we've ever seen at the box office. The iconic lines, memorable death scenes, and attention to set detail keep this franchise aloft the Mount Olympus of film. And it also showed us that, yes, folks, it's possible for a sequel to be just as good and maybe even better than the original. And that is what The Godfather feels like as a whole, the original. The property against which all future crime stories would be judged. Sure, there were tons of mob movies made for decades before The Godfather ever existed. We even now have fake old-timey mafia movies like Angels with Filthy Souls and Home Alone. It still blows my mind that's not a real movie. But forever after the 1970s, it didn't matter what format the story was in. Goodfellas, The Sopranos, and everything else had to give it up to the OG. The Godfather is overtly referenced multiple times throughout The Sopranos, but it's Tony who can most relate to what the film's major players are going through. He would be very interesting in that world. Ooh, that's an episode I want to talk about. But for this show, it's the film franchise that takes a slight edge. The Godfather wins the wild card round and thus the match.
You know, you're a stupid mother. You know that?
It's not personal, Sonny. It's strictly business.
But there was no right or wrong decision to make for this one. Of all the episodes of Versus I've ever done, my extremely informal polling came back with the most mixed results for which of these contenders is the best. And that's the beauty of, well, beauty. It's in the eye of the beholder. And here's a parting hot take. The Godfather 3 is pretty good. It certainly ain't 1 or 2, but I dug it more than I remember. And that ending of The Sopranos, it is still surprisingly abrupt. I know it's coming, but it still sneaks up on me, like a gunman in a diner. But wow, the attention to detail in that final scene really brings back so much from every season, maybe every episode of the entire show's run. Okay, that's my 2 cents. Now it's your turn, dear viewer. Which is your favorite, and why? Hit me up on social media at Mark Ellis Live with your take. And until next time, oh, we're not gonna do the cut to black joke. I already did it once, that's right. Well, okay, I guess thanks for watching, and don't stop believing, unless you get a fish in the mail, because we all know what that means. I'm Mark Ellis, and I'll see you next time on Versus.